Welcome to Across the Gun Counter, guys. I'm your host, Joe Riva, joined by my co-host,
Tyler Weaver.
All right, and this week, guys, we are going to be starting off with a more gunsmith-centric topic here. So I'm going to kind of pass the reins off to Tyler here this week to start off. And what are we talking about?
Alrighty, so today we're going to be talking about barrels. Pretty much everything that goes into them, selecting the barrel, the rifling process, what to look for. Because it's one of those things, a lot of people, okay, you pick an AR off the shelf or any gun for that matter, and do you really know what kind of rifling process was done on the barrel? Do you know what twist rate it is? Most of the time you just assume, okay, the manufacturer put it out and this is what's good for this gun. So really what goes into barrel selection? And it's one of those things where, Joey, I know across the gun counter from your point of view, it's not a question that gets asked that much.
I mean, you see it a lot of times, I guess, more with higher end stuff, like what kind of barrel is here, what's the twist rate? I think that's probably the most common question I get is
twist rate. Yup.
What's the twist rate when it comes to AR-15s? And typically, what is it chambered in? Not more of the, into in-depth details about what actually goes into it. Is it a free float?
Mm-hmm.
Is it a non-free float? I mean, most ARs, actually all ARs are going to be free float barrels. But
for the most part.
Yeah, I was going to say, correct me if I'm wrong. But
if you're using like the old style handguards that kind of clamp onto it, then it's not really free float.
Oh, okay, gotcha. But
yeah, twist rate, I mean, you see a lot of hunters in specific asking about twist rate because it matters for the particular weight bullet that they're going to be using.
Oh, that's especially common with shotguns with chokes, too. I notice everyone always asks the different chokes and stuff of that nature.
True. Honestly, with preparing for this whole podcast, I completely forgot about shotgun barrels.
Oh, wait. I remember shotguns and you didn't? That's...
Yes, you called me out on it.
Wow, yep. That's funny. Okay, so we're going to skip past shotgun barrels
yeah,
right now, because that's a topic
for right now.
Itself.
You know what? For today, shotgunners don't matter. We're ignoring you. So... Anyway, bringing it back, what really makes twist rate matter for the average shooter picking a gun off the shelf, something that's already been barreled, is the particular bullet weight that they anticipate shooting. So like you were saying, Joey, for AR-15s, a lot of guys ask because, what's the common ones for AR-15? 55 grain.
55 and 62, I believe, are the most common, which someone's going to beat me up over this on the different grainage and stuff like that, but there's like 1.9, 1.8, and 1.7. And if I recall correctly, 1.9 is kind of your more traditional standard for 55 grain. 55 grain, 60
for the shorter barrels.
Yeah, I think...
I was going to say, I believe the longer barrels were what? They might have even been 1 in 12.
Well, the original style, I believe it was, with the M16 variant during Vietnam, the M16A1, I believe they were 1 in 12. Because I know our one buddy, he was doing the retro build, and I think his is actually a 1 in 12 twist rate. And his
I think mine is as well.
And that was a 20-inch barrel, if I recall correctly, on the old M16A1s.
Yes.
Yeah, see, and that was using the pencil barrel, which the cool thing is with the pencil barrel, it's extremely active. You don't get the longevity with the pencil barrel that you do with like a heavier barrel. But...
And once they have they're susceptible to heat because they are so thin.
Yep, so that's kind of why they call them a pencil barrel, because there's not nearly as much metal on the outside and stuff like that. They're much thinner. They don't have as long of a barrel life, but you do get a lighter barrel, and you typically are going to have a more accurate barrel.
Mm-hmm. And when it comes to twist rate and barrel length, really what makes the difference, a lot of people do think it's like, okay, I need this twist rate for this bullet weight. Mm-hmm. But really, I think scientifically, the way it breaks down is you need a certain twist rate for the length of contact that bullet actually makes on the rifling. Which, granted, a heavier bullet, there's only one way to cram it into the same diameter, and that's to make it longer.
Well, that's the thing is some people make it seem like is if you have like a 1 in 7 twist, or you don't have certain twist rates, you're not able to shoot heavier grain ammo.
Exactly, and it's not necessarily the weight of the ammo; it's the amount of the length of the ammo. So, like, especially when you get into, like a lot more hunting rounds, wad cutters compared to like a Spitzer bullet, then it changes it because the bullet dimensions are completely different. So, for twist rate, typically for a shorter bullet, for that caliber, you're going to want like a slower twist rate. I'm going to screw this up all night. Twist rate. So, like you were saying with ARs, what was it, 1 in 12 for the 20-inch AR?
Yep. That's a slower
So,
twist rate there, so that makes
yes,
more sense to have it over the longer distance.
exactly. So, twist rate is broken down, 1 in 12 is one twist per every 12 inches, which makes it a slower twist rate than a 1 in 7, which is one full twist for only 7 inches compared to 12. So, for a shorter bullet, you're going to want a slower twist rate,
Okay.
which is kind of odd.
Yeah, I was
So,
gonna say it's almost trying to picture it without a diagram. It's kind of
it is very difficult, but if you think of it, okay, I hate using the term because, typically, yes, lighter is a shorter bullet, longer bullets are heavier. If you think the lighter bullet needs a slower twist rate, the larger bullet needs a faster twist rate. I think of the bullet has more ass, so you need more twist to get it going. Honestly, it's one of the things that stick in my mind so I don't screw it up.
it's a good way to put it.
I mean, think about it. The bullet's got a little bit more ass on it, so you have to try harder to twist it to spin it to get it to stabilize.
Yeah, I mean it makes sense.
Yep. And you can tell whether you have the correct twist rate or not for your load, because if the twist rate is too slow, it just flat out won't stabilize. You can't, like a top, if you don't spin it fast enough, it just wants to wobble all over the place. You'll get a lot of like keyholing, and like the bullet will be hitting the target sideways.
That's why those
Where
rifles that company was trying to do a couple of years ago without the rifling, like they had semi-rifling in the barrels. Do you remember that?
Oh, the straight rifling, I think it was.
Yeah, it was like that straight fluting or something of that
Mhm.
nature, and it was
Yeah,
like,
because then it's not a rifle.
yeah, it's not a full twist. It's not even a one in anything twist at that point.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So what was it? A slow twist will get it to tumble, whereas a fast twist will kind of over stabilize it, and you won't get consistency out of it. So I would rather over stabilize it than under stabilize it, but of course everybody's going for a perfectly stabilized bullet.
So that's why
Twist rate.
the shorter AR barrels, you're going to see more commonly in like a 1.7 twist opposed to a 1.8 twist or a 1.9 twist because they're only about a 7.5 inch barrel. So you're only going to have that one twist about the full length of the barrel.
Oh, absolutely. And especially people running like pistol ARs. I mean, twist rate is pretty critical. A lot of people want to see at least like maybe one full twist before it leaves.
Exactly. That's what I'm getting at. So it's if you have a 1.8 or 1.9, it's not going to make sense if you're chopping barrels.
Mm-hmm. And that's the other thing I have to explain to some of my customers where it's like, hey, I want to shorten this barrel up. So with shortening a barrel, yes, you have twist rate that plays into it, whether it will still be able to stabilize or not, depending on how dramatic you're cutting it. But also velocity changes with barrel length.
Mm-hmm.
Some people, if you're cutting, okay, say you have like an odd size thread on the muzzle and you're cutting it back like that half inch or whatever it is, you're not going to see a tremendous drop in velocity. But if you're taking a few inches off, man, I've had times where like specifically gas guns where they won't cycle anymore. My AK that I SBR'd, they had a 16-inch barrel. It went down to, I forget what the Krinkov is, maybe 8.5, 9 inches, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So you're taking a good amount you're taking like maybe 5 or 6 inches off the barrel, and now suddenly it doesn't want to cycle because it doesn't have that length of barrel to build up velocity and pressure.
Yeah, and that's kind of crucial is you need that pressure with certain rifles. Actually, any rifle, it's going to be crucial to get a certain amount of pressure to actually get it to cycle.
Oh,
So
yeah.
some people just think I can just chop a barrel willy-nilly, and that's really not the case. Or if you do
No.
chop it, you need to make sure you're chopping it at certain points.
Yeah. And what surprised me, I shouldn't say surprised me, but one thing that really stood out, especially with AK barrels, is how off-center the bore is once you chop it. Because a lot of people don't realize that when you're trying to drill a hole perfectly straight over that distance, it in between it varies. So at the front of the barrel and at the back of the barrel, it might be perfectly concentric, but in between it kind of floats because that drill that drills that long ass hole drifts,
Mm-hmm.
So on like the AK, as soon as I chopped it, man, you could see the bore was far off to one side compared to the other. And
Yes.
it's something, okay, say you wanted to chop the barrel and then thread it for a silencer. You kind of can't make that happen at that point.
No, because you already took down how much of the barrel.
Mm-hmm. And that leads me into another topic is how barrels are made, especially with like AK barrels where they're hammer forged. So you have a lot of them are cold hammer forged. So you basically start out with something that might be like a 6-inch slug of steel that just gets beating the crap out of it with these hammers that elongates it. And sometimes they even go as far as to hammer forge the rifling into it. So they'll actually have like I think some of them might be tungsten carbide or some extremely hard metal that has the rifling fit into it that they essentially hammer the barrel around, if that
That's how
makes
they do.
sense.
Well, that's how they do most pistol barrels, like the cold hammer forged barrels you always see.
Mm-hmm.
I actually learned that when I was looking at building a Glock years ago. Was cold hammer forged barrels, and basically that's how they do it. They just beat the rifling around it essentially.
Yeah. And honestly, when it comes to hammer forge, it's a very tough, very wear resistant barrel just because of the process of hammer forging. You're essentially compressing that steel into the shape that you need it. I mean,
That's also the
that
most common way of doing a barrel, correct?
is one of the most economical,
Okay.
because it's quick, it's cheap, it gets the job done. Another one is just, essentially you take a barrel that's drilled. If we want to get into rifling procedures, button rifling, which is similar, where it takes like a tungsten carbide, what they call a button. So think of it like, maybe 3 or 4 inches of tungsten carbide that essentially has the rifling like molded into it,
Okay.
and you're shoving that through the barrel, which is essentially like ironing the rifling into the barrel, if that makes sense. It displaces the metal with force.
Okay.
So it's kind of a weird process, but I mean, I'm sure there's videos of it on YouTube where you're
You have to
essentially
take a
just
look into it.
forcing this tungsten carbide button through and forcing the rifling into it. And because of the twist that's on that button, it automatically like twists the button through the barrel as it goes.
Now let me ask you this. This is a question I had years ago. Some
Mm-hmm.
random person asked me when I worked at one of my old jobs when I was, talking about guns. And I actually didn't know the answer to it. It was, can you re-rifle a barrel?
I mean, you'll typically see that type of stuff with like more of the muzzle loader community or like
Okay.
flintlocks and stuff like that, where ball size and patch size is kind of subjective, if that makes sense. Where it's like,
Yeah.
yeah, you can kind of open it up a little bit and recut the rifling, and you're good to go.
But now something like, let's say, I don't know, like a Mosin Nagant. Let's say you had a Mosin Nagant with a shot out barrel. Could you re-rifle a barrel like that? I mean, cost aside.
Cost aside, no, it's definitely it's not something that's really feasible.
Okay.
I mean, you got to remember anytime you're taking metal out of it, now you're opening it up, and it's not gonna stabilize correctly.
Okay.
So the other thing, getting back to like rifling procedures, button rifling and hammer forging are definitely more of the two common ones. You also have broach rifling, which cuts the rifling in, but like think of it like a cutter with each tooth getting progressively bigger and bigger to the point where it does cut it to the correct depth. That's
Okay.
another more economical way, but you also do get a lot more like tooling marks, so you don't really, I don't want to say you don't see it as much, but it is a different way of doing it where button rifling is a little easier. Broach rifling is not going to put as much stress on the barrel either.
Okay.
So like hammer forging and button rifling, they put a lot of stress on the barrels to the point where some of those barrels can't even be contoured or fluted afterwards because the barrel's just going to want to twist and do all sorts of weird things once you start relieving that stress.
Hmm.
Whereas like broach rifling is a cutting action, so it's not putting nearly as much stress on the barrel. I'm not exactly sure what manufacturers use broach rifling as far as like cut rifling, where you're taking a cutting tool and literally cutting each one of those grooves individually. I know Bartland still does that, which is part of the reason their barrels are extremely accurate. Because if you're cutting each one of those grooves individually, you can kind of do whatever you want with it.
You're basically
So,
fine tuning the barrel in the making, in the whole
oh
barrel
yeah,
making process.
absolutely. Which is why you'll even see Bartland offers gain twist, which I mean, you've probably never even heard of that from the
Nope.
retail standpoint. So gain twist is where you could actually start out with the barrel at a slower twist and speed it up towards the muzzle.
Ooh.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
that's very interesting.
That's fascinating, isn't it?
I never heard of that with the rifling. I recall a while ago, wasn't someone trying to make an ammunition like that?
I believe so.
Or wasn't that part of the concept with 5.7 where no, there was something where it started off slower and then maybe I'm
As
just
it builds up pressure, it spins faster.
yeah, maybe I'm just imagining this, but I could have swore I read about a round like that, or maybe I dreamt of a round like that.
Maybe. But yeah, it's one
Possible.
of those things like, especially when you're really trying to dial in for accuracy, these people are going for stability. And one of the concepts is that, hey, it's hard to stabilize a round right out of the cartridge with a fast twist, but fast twist is what really stabilizes certain bullets. So it's like if we could start it out slow, kind of ease it into that fast twist, will it be better? You have the ability to do that with cut rifling.
Now, for doing, we'll say a hunting rifle or precision rifle,
A really good hunting rifle.
yeah. What would be the preferred type of rifling you would want to have for your firearm then?
Honestly, I would go with something button rifled. There's a lot of good companies that do button rifling. I mean, granted, cut rifle, if you're asking for the best, I would say cut rifling without a doubt. But there's a lot of great barrel manufacturers that still use button rifling processes. They just go the extra step, whereas they're air gauging their barrels, they're stress relieving them, which we can get into all that, but they're making a high quality barrel out of it, still using these more economical processes where they're giving you a barrel blank at like, $280, somewhere in that ballpark, which really isn't bad.
Well, see, because even so, I was just sitting here thinking, I'm like, what's like the most common kind of rifling you see done or how they make the barrels, in the process. And I just did a quick Google search on a couple companies, and yeah, Cold Hammer Forge is your typical for your entry kind of line company. Every single company starting off is gonna do just a hammer forge barrel.
Yeah. Yeah. Typically, like I said, it's one of the most wear resistant.
And it's the most economic, like you said too. It's the
Yes.
easiest one to do. It's the quickest process to do.
Yup. Because that's the thing. It's like, it was a while ago. I think I watched a video on the, what was it? The Tavor, how they make those barrels. Yup. There's a video on YouTube of how the Tavor barrels are made. And I mean, they show you like in almost real time. Like, here's the little like 6-inch slug of steel. It goes through this machine. It gets rolled out a little longer, and they do the cold hammer forging process. And at the end, the end of the line, it's a barrel. And it's crazy how quick it goes from just like raw material to completed barrel. Now, granted, it still needs like muzzle threads and stuff like that, but it's a functional barrel at that point.
Now, I kind of have some more questions as we're kind of going through with different types of barrels, and I'm trying.
Go ahead. Like I said, this is a deep topic that I really, really wanted to get into because it's kind of like the bread and butter of gunsmithing.
Well, now it kind of has me thinking more who's doing what and what companies are doing what kind of barrel making and what process is going out. Because you always see cold hammer forged. And that's why I had initially asked, is that the most common process? And it absolutely has to be now that I think about it. There's no way any other company can survive. I'm not survive because that's not the right word, but you know what? Survive, yeah, that is the right word with doing something more for less. I'd say anything sub $1,000 is probably going to have a cold hammer forged barrel in terms of your basic rifle.
For the most part, I mean, like I said, button rifling is very economical as well because you think all you have to do is, I mean, basically one pass with that tool. Some manufacturers push it, some manufacturers pull it, but regardless, this thing has the rifling on it. It's got to get from one end of the barrel to the other. So it is very economical, but like I said, you're also putting a lot of stress on it.
Yeah,
so typically those barrels are, pre-contoured, they're shaped and everything. Whether or not they do the threads for the receiver beforehand, that I'm not sure of. But, they just essentially pull that rifling through and there you go, it's done.
So now when it comes to, I guess, selecting a barrel, let's say you're building an AR. What would your first question be when it comes to building a barrel? What would the first thing you'd want to look at would be?
I mean, what are we using the gun for? Is it going to be precision? Because for like ARs and stuff like that, I think cold hammer forged is a great way to go.
Okay.
But, if you're going for an absolute precision rifle, yeah, I want something that's button rifled, broach rifled. I don't even know if anybody's cut rifling AR barrels, but it's got to be stress relieved. Like I said, air gauging is another good one, which we should probably discuss because a lot of people don't even understand what air gauging is.
Yeah. What exactly is air gauging?
It's a way of basically measuring the, how would I describe it? Like the internal volume of a rifle barrel. So if you have it calibrated at, this diameter barrel should, I don't want to say leak, but for lack of a better term, leak this much amount of air. If it's more, it's going to be a bigger bore. If it's less, it's going to be a tighter bore. So it's a very good way of them measuring consistency of their bore diameters.
Okay.
So, especially as a gunsmith doing barrel threading, I use these indicator rods that have special ground bushings based on different barrel diameters. And I can almost tell you, like on a Savage or something lower end, it's typically going to be on the higher diameter for the bore. Whereas like a more precision rifles, there's been times I actually had to go back to the manufacturer of my indicating rods and order a specific size because they were so tight, it was tighter than anything I had. If they said a barrel was 308, it was dead nuts 308. It wasn't 308 and 2/10. Something like that.
It was right where it was supposed to be.
It was dead nuts where it was supposed, like if it like I said, if it was marked 308, it measured 308.
Hey,
So
as we're talking about all this barrels and barrels 101 and gunsmithing and all that, one thing that kind of popped into my mind was years ago that something that I changed my perspective of was threading a barrel. And that was, I thought it was as simple as throwing a tap and die on there and just kind of threading the barrel. And I think that, and from one of our first conversations I remember actually having working around in your shop was, yeah, you can do that, but
they usually end up in my shop.
Yeah, so why don't you just want to do something like that for a barrel? Why wouldn't you want to do something as simple as a tap and die? And what would you recommend doing to thread a barrel properly?
So, like I was saying before with the AK barrel that I cut down, the board doesn't necessarily, how do I want to put it? It doesn't run parallel to the center line of that barrel. So, if you can imagine, think of it like a really elongated arc.
Okay.
Essentially. Granted, some barrels are a lot straighter than others. I've had ones just about run dead nuts true, perfectly straight. And others, I basically ran out of adjustment on my lathe where the ass end of the barrel is running out as far as it possibly can, where the muzzle is running dead nuts true. So that bore essentially arcs throughout that barrel, extremely minute where it is hard to see, but it does wander off center. So if you say you were to take your barrel to a typical machinist and say, I want this threaded on a lathe, because that sounds like a decent procedure, they would indicate the outside of the barrel in and thread it true to the outside where it might not be true to the actual bore, which you run into problems with, especially with suppressors, where that bullet has to travel through that tube and not hit anything.
Yeah.
So if it's off center, it's going to end up smacking one of your baffles, and sometimes they even take the suppressor with it.
Yeah, I've actually heard of that happening in the field. When I say field, at ranges, and people accidentally shooting their suppressors off because the barrel was off center, it wasn't threaded properly.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, can you imagine that? Hold on. I just want to put that in perspective. When it comes to firearms, and I'm not... Okay, imagine buying a $1,000 suppressor, paying your $200 tax stamp on top of that, and then doing a $30 threading job. Like,
yep.
What are you thinking?
Oh, I know.
And hey, to whoever's listening to this, you know who you are. That I don't know anyone in particular, but I've seen people. Like, it's one of the best the best things I ever heard in sales was back when I worked at Best Buy was you wouldn't put cheap gas in your Ferrari. And it's absolutely true. Like, why are you going to do all this stuff to have, like, all the best gear and then cheap out on the gunsmithing job or cheap out on the threading or just something like... It just doesn't make sense to me.
Okay, so here's a good one because I was gonna say, yeah, I think I did tell you. I finally got my suppressor.
Yeah, the Switch is
So
exciting. Can't wait to go try that.
yes, finally got suppressor in hand. I'm like, all right, I have to try it on my short barreled AR.
Of
Granted, I
course.
didn't do any. I didn't do any of the barrel threadings. It's got an FN, factory barrel. So the muzzle brakes timed on it and everything. I slapped the suppressor on, and I have the special not indicating rods, suppressor alignment rods, I guess they're called, that you check the alignment with. And I drop it in, and you can noticeably see it's off to one side,
Oh,
where
really?
like I don't know if I would run a 223 or 556 like end cap on it, but with a 30 cal end cap, it's more than enough clearance. So I was popping it off outside just to try it.
Oh, that's awesome.
But it goes to show you, like, even a very reputable manufacturer like FN, by the time you have their barrel threads, the muzzle device, this had to be timed with the special shims. You have tolerance stacking in there that can skew it slightly. And it's enough where, like, I can notice that alignment rod's off center. Say you did your own barrel threading job and it was worse than what FN can put out from the factory. Good luck.
Yeah. It says something, doesn't it?
Yep. And that's the thing. When it comes to, like you said, if you're just running a die over it, especially with a suppressor, it's got to butt up against like a nice square shoulder, or that can's getting tweaked.
Mm-hmm. And that's the thing is, again, I don't understand why some people spend this amount of money on some of this gear and then they'll cheap out on something like that.
Yep.
Or they'll buy the most expensive can, but then they'll have the cheapest barrel. Like, I mean, there's certain
Oh,
times, like,
no. Honest,
I'll be
a
honest,
barrel's where the money's got to go.
I'll be honest, there are certain things like my 458, I have a cheaper barrel for my 458 SOCOM. And I mean, that was just a build that I was like, I just want to try this round. I
It's a
really
range
just,
toy.
yeah, this was literally what the whole thing was behind it. I wasn't putting in something
Mm-hmm.
that I'm going to put like $10,000, even $1,000 I might have into the build total when I'm done. But it's when I even got the barrel, I had even said to you, I said, if I really like this caliber and I really like this build, I'm either A, going to get a new barrel for this, or B, I'm going to get another one with a better barrel.
Yep. And I mean, that's where I am with a lot of customer builds. If somebody brings me their standard Remington 700 and was like, hey, I want a decent barrel for this and true up the action. Okay, great. We're starting with a good barrel. I could fix the action. That's no problem. But
Mm-hmm.
putting a shit barrel on a good action isn't going to get you anywhere.
No, exactly. And I mean, if you're looking to do anything serious with it, I'd say. I mean,
Yep.
if you're looking, even if you're looking for a fun range toy at times too, it really depends on what your options are out there too. Like I know certain
Mhm.
calibers you are a little more limited in what's considered a cheap and what's considered a good barrel. I don't know,
Yep.
50 Beowulf I think is kind of a decent example of that. There's not a whole, of course, someone's going to tell me there's 1,000 different Beowulf barrels out there. But I mean, there's really not a whole lot of 50 Beowulf barrels out there, and a lot of them you see
Yeah.
aren't even they're listed as what 12.7 or something like that. The metric
I
measurement
forget what it is.
yeah, for 50 cal.
But even that, what the hell was it? That 224 Valkyrie. I guess a lot of people were having issues stabilizing that round with just the barrels that were
I feel like
available.
that was a fad because I haven't heard too
Yeah.
much about that in a while.
Yeah. Well, again, especially reloaders, if reloaders can't get behind it, the caliber kind of dies.
That's very true. I mean, there's still people reloading for 7.7 Jap,
Yup.
so
But
says
yeah,
something.
again, twist rate plays into it. If we can't find a twist rate to justify a caliber, the caliber just dies. Because these manufacturers only put out certain twist rates.
They're gonna put out what's
You
more
know, it's
common and what's for more. I'd say from your major manufacturer, you're gonna have to expect a more common twist rate, or if you're at you got to be asking the right questions when you're looking at your most common manufacturers, like especially when it
yeah,
comes to like an AR-15 or your AK. If you're saying, "Hey, can I be shooting these heavier loads and do this, this, and this with it?" It's like, listen, you're spending $700 on this AR-15.
yeah. Don't expect miracles.
Like, come on, let's be real here. You have to let's get back down to earth here. You have to
Yup.
understand the limitation of what you're paying for too. And I'm not trying to knock that $700 AR-15. I think my first you're gonna my AR-15 I think I actually paid about $500 for, and that was for the Troy, and that was right before the pandemic. So
Yeah.
that'll tell you that's not even my first AR. That's just the one I have right now. One
Yeah,
of the
just
ones I have
something you
right now.
picked up.
Yeah. So if that tells you anything, and that was actually a decent one for the money, and you kind of have to remember you get what you pay for. So
Oh, absolutely.
if you're paying more for some of these guns, like I'll use Bergara for example. Like we have a really nice one
Ooh,
of their
good pick.
rifles. Ooh, so like they have a 22 rifle, the B14, and that rifle
Mm-hmm.
is probably about I want to say like
I was gonna say
1200.
about $1,000.
Oh, at least it's like like low thousands, like 1200, 13, something like
Mm-hmm.
that. But I'm curious what actually is in that barrel now because it's a really nice gun and it fetches such a high price tag. And people are like, well, it's a 22. I go, yes, but look at who's making the firearm. It's not your
Yeah,
average,
absolutely.
and I'm not trying to bash any company when I say anything like this, but it's not your run of the mill 22. It's not like, a Rossi or a Ruger or something like that that's just off the shelf. And I'm not trying to say those companies are bad, but it's not something as simple as a Ruger American,
Yeah,
where,
they're
yes,
Ruger American. They're putting out a rifle to be economical. They want people to be able to buy it. Where
simple.
Bagara, yeah, they want okay, the people that know the difference, the people that can achieve a certain level of accuracy, they're not
Yeah,
going to pick up a Ruger American for what they're going for.
no,
I mean,
they're
they might
looking for
have
more
one for the
metric.
squirrel in their backyard, but when they're going to the range to shoot, really accurate groups out of a 22, they're going to want a Bagara, they're going to want a CZ, something they put a
Ooh,
little bit more money into.
exactly. It's funny you mentioned CZ because CZ has some really nice 22 rifles.
They do. They put a lot of very good quality machining into their firearms. I cannot knock that. The only thing I can bitch about is that they're metric, so I can't thread barrels for them because I have a 1945 American lathe. I
That's
mean, in the 40s, did we know what the metric system was?
Hey, I mean, we won 2 world wars, right?
This is true.
We don't remember what my favorite is. There's countries that use the metric system, and then there's countries that went to the moon.
Yeah,
Hey, just saying.
exactly. And I mean, I joke with customers when they're like, "Hey, I got this CZ. I'd like to, have a custom barrel made up." It's like, yeah, the problem is my lathe doesn't know what metric is. They kind of look at me. It's like it's from 1945. It's a South Bend. I mean,
It's
this,
American. Come
yeah,
on.
this is old American machinery.
We didn't have
Plus,
we
I
didn't
think
have time for that metric nonsense. I
exactly. I
don't.
think this lathe might have even come from the Department of the Navy too.
Oh man, imagine. Yeah, that. Ooh, yeah, that time too. They have been like really no metric.
Yeah,
Actually, no. I think the military was using a little bit of metric.
I
So
couldn't even tell you honestly. All I know is like
I know now
the
that
way a lot of these manual lathes are geared, the way it makes the threads, it's only set up for like inch pattern, whatever you want to call it, inch pattern, American standard, threading. You would have to change out specific gears to be able to run metric threads. And even then, you can't engage and disengage like you do with typical threading. So, like rebarreling a metric thread gun's a lot bigger of a task on a lathe like I have
Well, I
than
remember
some of
that.
the other lathes that can do, both.
Well, I remember that was one of the initial problems people were complaining with the first CZ Scorpions that had come into the country. The pistols,
Okay.
the threading was the more metric threading, and then that's why the second batch that had kind
What
of
would it
came
be
in, they
like
had the half
13?
something like that. I think it was like that left hand 13 thread, but I could be wrong. And that's why they
Okay.
went to the half by 28 was because everyone's like, wow, we have to deal with this ridiculous threading, and
Mm-hmm.
you're always showing off people using these with suppressors. Now we have to get adapters for our suppressors and all this stuff.
Exactly.
And that's a whole nightmare. That's the only thing that bugs
Yep.
me in my USP. The threading is that left hand thread pitch. So I
Yep.
can.
And it's one thing like I've had a couple customers ask me like, "Hey, can you thread, my AK for a standard like slant break or whatever?" Kind of, which they don't usually take kindly to that, but it's one of those things I explained to them like I have an American lathe. So over the distance of a muzzle brake, I can turn it to that 14 millimeter diameter. That's no problem. It's just a 1 millimeter thread I can't really get. I think it's what is it? It's probably close to like 26 threads per inch that my lathe will do. That gets you kind of close to that 1 millimeter thread pitch. So it's like over the length of a muzzle brake, it really doesn't make any damn bit of difference. Your sloppy ass slant brake will still screw on. But if you're going for,
Plus,
if you're
it's an
going
AK.
for, it's an
Rifle's
AK.
fine.
Yeah, but if you're going for a true 14 millimeter by 1 left hand thread, I can't do it.
Definition of Tyler's AK builds. Rifle is fine.
Yeah, rifle's fine. You get what you pay for. No, but in all seriousness, guys, I do take a lot of pride in my AK builds. They're
Hell
they're
yeah.
pretty meticulous.
Absolutely, and they really go to show. And that's the thing
Yeah.
is with AK, I think barrel selection might not be as crucial. I'd say it is
It's pretty
something
much
like
just who has them on sale right now.
it pretty. But it really is with AK barrels. I mean, that's kind of the one cool thing I think about being an AK guy versus someone like an AR guy.
It's like,
Like,
okay, where can I find this barrel? Is it finished or unfinished? Does
is it
that matter
finished?
to me?
Yeah. Is it chrome lined or non chrome lined? Do I feel like cleaning? Am I shooting corrosive or not corrosive out of this
Ooh,
one?
that's another one we didn't touch on when it comes to barrels. Chrome lined versus non-chrome lined.
Ooh. That's really the main
So,
difference when I think AK barrels is chrome
yeah,
lined
when
versus
it
non
comes to
chrome lined.
AK barrels, so especially when you're doing a build, I mean, chrome line's going to be more wear resistant, where it's not going to be as susceptible to moisture and erosion, stuff like that. But it's not foolproof by any means. I mean, you could see the pictures I think I posted on Instagram of that Arasaka with a chrome lined barrel that was, you know,
Oh, that
I
was
don't want to say
awful.
neglected. Neglected's a bad word. It was used in, the Pacific. So, it's got pitting in it. So chrome line's not foolproof, but it definitely helps to protect the bore, especially when shooting like corrosive ammo and stuff like that. But if you're going to drill through it or try to recrown it, forget it because chrome is extremely hard. You can
It's
do it, but it's not fun.
it's funny. That's kind of the dilemma I'm having right now with the Yugo M72 build. Is if I
Okay.
go non chrome lined, it's more true to how the Yugoslavian builds were. But if
Yeah,
I go chrome lined, it makes
then it's better.
it makes so much more sense. And the Yugoslavians, they said the reason they didn't use chrome lining was because the ammunition they were using wasn't. I
Corrosive.
mean, it was corrosive, but it wasn't as corrosive because I believe it was like a
Okay.
semi-corrosive primer. And they said because it was brass case, it was different than steel case, than the copper wash brass, so it was less. It was just a bunch of nonsense. To be honest with you, I
Hmm.
think it was just a cost-cutting measure. At the end of the day, they were just like, we'll make the guys clean. Who cares about that?
Yeah, that's
Which,
the other thing.
considering the
It's
fact
it's
how
like,
overbuilt that
okay,
rifle
you
is,
you run a brush through it with some oil. Okay, fine.
yeah.
But
And I guess it's just because, those rifles were so overbuilt as it was. It's like, do they really, just that extra little chrome lining would have made sense, but.
yeah, and again, when it
Mm.
comes to production standpoint,
Mm-hmm.
barrels are one of the more expensive parts of a firearm. Uh,
True.
it's not uncommon, especially for me as a gunsmith, to be putting like a $600 barrel blank on a gun, and that's the blank alone. Mostly when you start getting into like the lightweight, the carbon fiber wrapped barrels, stuff like that, that you're really pushing the higher price end.
Mhm.
But a lot of money kind of should be going into your barrel. That's the life of the firearm.
Especially a precision rifle. If
Yeah,
you're not putting the majority of your money into that barrel, I mean, you're.
absolutely. And it's one of those things. I think I touched on it before, where like once I start machining a barrel, I can tell you if it's stress relieved or not. Some barrels are hand lapped, so
Mhm.
just from the process of rifling the barrel, especially with like broaching or some sort of like cutting tool, you have tooling marks that get dragged along the barrel, and with a bore scope you can really see it. It looks like different cuts in the rifling itself. Lapping is basically a process of smoothing all those out. I know a lot of old timers used to do a technique called fire lapping, which sounds sketchy as hell. Pretty much you take a lead bullet, typically cast yourself, that you impregnate like a lapping compound on the outside of, and you fire a certain amount of those through your bore, and they smooth it out. So yeah, talk about an old technique, but a lot of guys used to swear by it because yeah, it smooths out the tooling marks in your barrel and makes it a smoother shooting barrel. So there is some merit to it, but it's kind of I don't want to say a lost art, but when you have barrel manufacturers that are hand lapping barrels before they get to your doorstep, it kind of eliminates the need for that.
Mhm.
So you have lapped barrels. Stress relieving is another really good one. I can tell you a stress relief barrel from a non-stress relief barrel just when I start machining it, just because of the way the metal removes. It's one of those things. Stress relieving is like a process. The way I understand it, like heating and cooling the barrel
Mhm.
to relieve the built-up stresses in it from the rifling process or the drilling process. And if you've done any sort of metal work, you know that machining metal induces stress. There's been times I've bored out like bushings or sleeves, and as soon as you cut it with a saw blade, it kind of pinches that blade. That metal wants to spring close now that the stress is relieved. So it's one of those things. Stress relieving a barrel allows it to kind of get back into this natural state, if you will,
Okay.
so that you can perform these machining processes to them without any sort of adverse effects. So it's one of those things the end user might not exactly see or care whether it's a stress relief or non-stress relief barrel, but especially when you're doing more accurate, more critical process on it, do
It's
you
more
notice
crucial.
it? Oh yeah, yeah, absolutely. It's one of those things. If you give me a Savage barrel and I'll just say it, my go-to is Schillen barrels. If you give me those two barrels, don't tell me which is which and have me machine it. I could tell you which one is the Savage and which one is the Schillen,
Almost
just based
blindfolded.
on, yeah, I mean, honestly, I could probably do it blindfolded just because of, with a manual machine, you're physically handling the controls, handles, I don't know what you want to call them, but yeah, you feel everything. So like you can feel it in your hands, just the different qualities of steel.
It's
So
really interesting. You can always
yeah,
you kind of always notice that between like certain guns, the polymers too, which is a
oh,
budget
absolutely.
polymer and which is a better polymer, if you will.
Yeah, but that's the thing. Like, I never want to knock a gun company, like specifically Savage. I don't want to knock a gun company for being economical
No,
because
'cause
we
there's
need
something to
them.
be said.
We need them in the industry. It's just one of the things. If you're going for a super precision rifle, it's just not the manufacturer to be spoken about.
It's
Does
funny
that
because
make sense?
I get that, but I know there's some of my customers who will be like, I have a Savage and that's the most accurate rifle I've ever shot.
And don't
and
get
and
me
they're right.
wrong,
They're super accurate
you'll
rifles.
yeah, I mean, what is it? Savage has like a quote unquote like a free floating bolt head, so it kind of sits where it needs to be.
Mhm.
Whereas like if the bolt heads are fixed to the bolt, you might have one lug that has like 90 85 90% contact. The other lug might have 20, so you get a little bit of flex out of it. So like I do see some merit behind it, and for an economical rifle, it will give you, I mean, in my opinion, outstanding accuracy for what you're paying for it. Compared to, like we were just talking before we hit record, a defiance action where you're
Yeah.
paying 1800 dollars for the receiver. That's no trigger group, no barrel, no stock, any of that. Where shit, $1,800, what'll that get you for a Savage?
Oh, probably top of the line and some.
you know so there's something to be said with the QA, the attention to detail, stuff like that, especially when it comes to materials. And when it comes to selecting a barrel, specifically if you're having a gun rebarreled with a blank, I mean, barrel material is everything that they put into it, between hand lapping, air gauging, it all makes a difference in the end.
No, of course. So, hey, on that note, guys, I hope you all learned something when it comes to barrels. Whether it be, whether you want a short barrel, long barrel, I guess at the end you decide how much you want to put into your barrel. But I know if you asked Tyler over here, he's going to tell you you're going to want to put all the money into the barrel.
Yes, all the monies go into the barrel.
All the money's going to the barrel. But hey, I hope you learned a little bit something about barrels, kind of a quick breakdown or not so quick breakdown, I guess, on barrels. And, I think there's definitely more we can talk about in barrels in the future, especially with fluting and cuts and.
Oh, and I will. Like I said, barrels are where I start to dive in deep.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a lot to be said about them, and I think there's a lot that people just don't know about what goes into a barrel.
So I hope we could clear up some of the mud involved in barrels, selecting a barrel making, what all that jargon is.
Absolutely. Learn some terms, some twist rates, faster, slower twist rates. But Tyler, where can they find you at?
You guys can find me on the socials at Precision Rifle Works and at www.precisionrifleworks.com.
And you guys can follow myself over on Instagram on, say Picture762 as well as YouTube. But most importantly, you can follow Across the Gun Counter on Instagram at Across the Gun Counter or on our website, www.acrosstheguncounter.com. We're on one of our awesome many, distribution points where you can find us at Spotify, Apple, all that. Like, share, subscribe, all that good stuff. Hit follow so you can get all the newest content from us wherever you guys are.
Give a rating. We want to see some ratings coming up.
Please give us a rating. Like, subscribe, all that good stuff, guys. Until next time, take care. Stay safe.
See you guys.